Liam Hehir, who is with us. Kia ora, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. That was very well done.
And also Neale Jones, who's in the studio with me this morning. Kia ora, how are you?
Kia ora, good.
I'm going to talk politics with both of you, our political commentators, this morning on 9 to noon. We really need to start, I suppose, with the political poll out this morning. This was from the Taxpayers Union and Curia, taken at the beginning of August, predicting a hung parliament. Liam, I might start with you on this one. How's this going to be landing with the government and the coalition partners?
Well, there's absolutely no sugarcoating it. We've never had a one-term national government before. And, on the basis of this poll and others leading up to it, it's a serious risk. What it does show, I guess, is that the small parties are they'll set the price for what happens. But the government is certainly not going to get the customary easy first term win. It's going to be an unusual election, a first term government that's kind of fighting for its right to have a second term, something we haven't had in New Zealand for a while.
Neale.
Yeah, look, I still hold to the view that if the government can get the economy back on track by the election and people start to feel it, they've got a pretty strong case to the public for re-election. But I think where things currently stand, they're in a very dangerous position. The Ipsos Issues Monitor had them at 4.3 out of 10 in terms of government confidence. It's been pretty low around that way for a while. Christopher Luxon remains very unpopular with the public. It's hard to find anyone in the public who'll say a good word about him. The government's increasingly distracted by culture wars, increasingly divisive social issues. And, the economy, which I think they're correct, was their one big shot. They started the year on economic growth. They haven't actually got there. I mean, unemployment figures came out. Unemployment's now up to 5.2%. They boasted it could have been higher. Of course, the reality is the employment rate's gone down as well, so people have just given up. We have record numbers of people leaving the country, and we've just found that the tariff's been put up to 15%. They're going to find it quite hard in this environment to make the argument that they're the economic masterminds. You can't possibly risk it with Labour. I think they're in a really tough spot, and they've really got to work hard to get that economy moving, or I think they're in real trouble this election.
Yeah,
the cultural issues are certainly very unpopular with some part of the population and with Neale, but with the wider population, the National's on the right side of a lot of those things. And what you might see is if the economy can't help National back, is you might see a turn to a more negative campaign that focuses on those peripheral issues. Because while they might be unpopular with the left and with the media and with institutions like that, they're not necessarily as unpopular with the wider population. So we might be in for a more negative campaign next year if things don't turn around.
I still hold to the view that was basically the John Key strategy, which was that New Zealand is fundamentally socially liberal. And I remember once at the backbencher being hectored by a National Party strategist that they had courted social liberalism and Labour had nothing to stand for anymore. We're a long way from that kind of triumphalism. I think certainly cultural war issues work for a certain portion of National's base. They certainly work for New Zealand First and ACT. I think for middle New Zealand, I think most people are actually pretty inclusive, tolerant, want a sensible discussion on the treaty, want to be inclusive of trans people, don't want to spend all their time in division. And frankly, when we're about to be hit by tariffs, going up to 15%, and, the foreign minister's busy going on about, which name's first on the passports, I think it can start to speak to them being distracted by peripheral issues.
Yeah.
When actually people want to know the government is spending every waking moment on cost of living and making their lives better, because people are really hurting out there.
But on those issues that you've mentioned, there are a number of 80-20 or 70-30 wedge issues which Labour is on the wrong side of. And I can see why you wouldn't like National to focus on those things, but National might have a different calculus.
I mean, I don't want to focus on those things primarily because I think they're toxic and corrosive to our society, but look, I also think there is something there for Labour and the opposition parties to not get caught up in culture wars that they could be on the wrong side of. I think, frankly, I think the left needs to be progressive. I think the left needs to be liberal. I think the left needs to be focused squarely on cost of living and those hip pocket issions. This
is the thing, I guess, Liam, isn't it? Because, we see the statistics out with unemployment last week. How big of a juggernaut is this to turn for the national-led government? The economy is seemingly streets ahead of everything else when it comes to the sorts of issues that voters are focused on. And if they can't get this right, it does look like it's going to be an enormous Achilles heel.
Absolutely. Like, the economy is always going to be miles ahead of the thing that people care about the most, although not the only thing. 5.3% is, it's actually, by historical terms, it's not the end of the world. We've certainly suffered much higher. We've suffered much higher in living memory. But in combination with all the other sort of gloomy economic feeling, it is going to be a drag. It's going to be something that the National Party can't campaign on. And it's getting very late in the day for it to be able to turn it around to the point where it can make a strength of it. And the simple reality of the simple fact is that, you can say that it's the world economy, you can point to comparative nations, but when you are a first-term government that campaigned on fixing the economy, you actually just have to take responsibility for it. There's no way around it. And that's why those social issues perhaps have more salience. You can probably get more mileage on it. And I know that there will always be these people saying, don't throw me in the briar patch, don't throw me in the briar patch. But you've seen around the world that actually those social issues, where there has been sort of a progressive or a little overreach, have actually started to resonate with the wider population. And we are not as bad as those countries, but there is probably room for it, because you certainly can't run on unemployment when it's stubbornly high.
Yeah. Look, I'll leave that. I don't think there's enough room for three parties to run on right-wing culture war issues, and it certainly wasn't Christopher Luxon's strategy at the start of this year when he said it was the economic growth year. Look, I also think there is a risk for National here in that, and sort of downplaying some of the figures. And Labor got itself caught in this before the last election. I saw Nicola Willis say, inflation, unemployment could have been worse, and there's a glass half full mentality among the commentariat. And inflation is down, but of course the reality is things are still expensive. They're just getting more expensive less quickly. The reality is when people are feeling it hard and they hear ministers say, things aren't so bad, look at the numbers, and meanwhile they're giving sort of 80% increases to board directors, it's very easy to slip into looking out of touch, and that's the real danger for the government. They've got to be very careful that they don't look like they think everything's fine, they excuse it on the numbers, and they dismiss concerns, because you've got to start where the people are, and even if numbers could have been worse based on Treasury predictions or are slightly better than they would have otherwise been, that's no comfort when you can't afford your rent and you can't afford to fill your car up.
Especially, I guess, Liam, when you have people like Simon Bridges, coming out last week with the sort of comments he was making about the economy, but also the tone.
Yeah, well, he's got his own agenda to push now, of course, in his role. But, I agree with Neale. Numbers are abstract, right? Like, you can slice and dice numbers, you can point to numbers, but you can't tell people to ignore the evidence of their eyes and ears and what they have to pay for groceries on the basis of numbers. People just tune them out, and they always have. How people feel about the economy is how the economy is really doing. And the government risks getting into quite a toxic position of its own if it starts to tell people to ignore the evidence of their eyes and ears.
I guess, it does seem like people are doing it tough, getting jobs. The unemployment is certainly going to be a problem. Neale, what's your sense of how easily or otherwise this is going to be to turn around and actually make that change in the time that this government has left in the term?
I think the reality is it's probably outside the government's control largely. It'll be international factors that probably determine, and just generally, the economic mood that determines how that goes. Most New Zealand political parties talk a big game about how they're going to fix the economy, and I think it was Michael Cullen who talked about New Zealand being a cork bobbing along on the top of the ocean. So I think a lot of it just falls down to luck for the government, to be honest. But there are a few things. Like Bridges said, a bit of stimulus probably wouldn't go astray. The construction sector's like 18,000 jobs. There are ways the government can, put a bit of money in, be a little bit less focused on how quickly you get back to surplus, and actually try to build a bit more economic confidence.
I guess if we take a look at what else was going on perhaps over the weekend, both Labour and the Greens having pretty sizable conferences, meetings. Neale, what was your take on some of the strategy and some of the policy that's come out?
I thought with Labour's caucus retreat, that wasn't a hugely public event, but my understanding is they had they were very focused on the need to have focus and discipline leading up to the election, start to roll policy out that speaks to a core theme around cost of living and their homes, health, jobs mantra. And critically, there is a consensus now in the Labour caucus, and I mean, I think there always was, that they can't just sit back and hope that a dysfunctional government falls down. They have to give people a reason to vote for them. And so, I do have some heart as a Labour supporter. They're better prepared than they have been in many elections. They've appointed a campaign manager already. There's a deputy on the way. They appointed a strategy director about 6 months ago. And their digital media, their social media has really picked up in recent times. So they're starting to get those logistics in place. And I think as well, they are very focused on the need not just to have a bunch of policies, I think as we saw last election, coming out incoherently, but start to build a core critique and alternative to the government, and then release a few sort of simple, clear policies that speak to those issues. And we'll start seeing those coming out later this year, I understand. So I think that, they're realistic of the challenge ahead of them, but I can see they're starting to get things in place. The thing I think Labour does need to really work on, personally, is they often come across as quite technocratic and bloodless, and sound a lot like lawyers and policy advisors. And some of my best friends are lawyers or policy advisors, but I think they one thing they do need to do is really show people they understand the depth of feeling and frustration out there, and then very in a compelling way sheet that back home to an out-of-touch government and provide some hope that things can be better, because I think people are looking for that as well. So that's the big challenge. I think the Greens with their AGM, I think it was a really good AGM. I thought Chloe Swarbrick gave an excellent speech yesterday where she talked about the need to, not be on your screens, but in the real world engaging with people, not to sort of, focus on social media algorithm outrage, but persuade people to try and change things. And I thought in her speech, she gave a really grounded speech about the real struggles people face and the need to provide solutions to those struggles. So I think she's a very smart politician, and I think the Greens are one to watch next year.
Liam,
I don't really fault Labour for being tentative or taking sort of an opposition first approach at this stage. And I think we really did see that in the caucus retreat. I mean, it was still very much, announcing the announcement going on, inching towards a capital gains tax, but, only giving indications, only giving the same kind of commitment-free indications that we've had in the past. But having said all of that, look, it works, right? I mean, the opposition's first job is to provide scrutiny. They're not the stewards of political power like the government is. And if you look at the polls, Labour has done incredibly well. They're a first-term opposition, according to the Taxpayer Curia poll today, has inched ahead of the government. And that's a pretty good testament to some real discipline on their side. And that sort of strategic silence, or that sort of retreat from detail, is part of that of that discipline, and it's working for them, and it's fair enough too. I think the Green AGM did kind of show the problems that they might have coming up in the next election, which are problems National has too, which is who their coalition partners are. Quite something to have Chloe Swarbrick and Marama Davidson say that they want to lead the next government. You might think that's pretty delusional, and that would be because it is. But for Luxon to say, well, I don't want to argue with them about it, that kind of shows that it's very much still about keeping your head down. It's a sort of a passive-aggressive approach. All incoming governments, that's what it's going to be, have to battle with that, and it's going to be no different for Labour and the Greens. It's not going to be necessarily the same cosy relationship that they had under James Shaw.
I also think Hipkins' response was quite smart, which was, there's no benefit in Labour and the Greens fighting. They need to turn their fire on where the real enemy is, and that's the government they both want to bring down. And I think Hipkins made the point that they will each have to go out and make their case and win voters, and they'll each have their points of difference, and that's the nature of politics. But there's no need for it to be personal. There's no reason for them to have arguments. I actually think that the key thing for Labour and the Greens, and to a great extent to Party Māori, is to sit down and probably agree. And when I was working for Labour, we did regular MOU dinners and things with the Greens where we'd sit down and go, okay, we'll have different views, we'll have to differentiate, we might disagree on some things, but we're not going to get into fights or create distractions or put at risk the idea that we could work together, because we've actually, our joint goal is to change the government.
Liam, to talk...
But Hipkins can't unilaterally impose that.
No, but I think what we saw with his comments was an attempt not to get drawn into a fight, but just to be quite reasonable about it. And, look, I don't know the extent to which they're planning together strategically on the election, but I think it would be a good idea if they did.
presumably, Liam, it's a similar sort of situation that Christopher Luxon gets into when, one of his coalition partners says something and he ends up in a situation where he says, well, that's not the language that I would use. Or, it's that same sort of idea of
yeah, totally.
Yes, you're all working together, but you're creating that space where you can.
Yeah, all the minor parties, though, they've cracked the code, which is that to stay relevant, they can't play nice. They've got to push themselves as much as they possibly can. And it has been. This is one of the things that held Luxon back, is he hasn't been able to have the same leadership that other prime ministers have taken for granted, because he's had to deal with these bad boys in his team who are constantly pushing to the max what they can get away with in terms of creating daylight with the government. And all I am saying is that as it's not easy, it hasn't been easy for him, it's not going to be easy for Hipkins either. Yeah. And Hipkins can't unilaterally decide that they're all going to be friends. He has to work with the partners he's got, and it was a pretty aggressive thing from the Greens, and I don't think that the TPM are going to be any more easier to get along with.
I think you're right in the dynamics there. I just think you can mitigate that somewhat by agreeing that, having some sort of no surprises and agreeing that you'll differentiate from time to time, but fundamentally there's a strong relationship underneath that, which means you can weather it.
To talk about
two to agree. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
To talk about something which has been out in there for a week now. It broke on Monday morning last week. This is the NCA reforms. Well, reforms, scrapping, I suppose, is probably a better word. Liam, how do you think this has been? How this has landed? How it's been taken by teachers, and how successful has this been for Erica Stanford?
Well, I said I don't think it's going to be very popular with like teachers and teachers' unions, and probably some within the Ministry of Education. But there's another sort of more peripheral group of stakeholders in this who are known as parents, and for them, it's quite popular. And I don't think anyone I've talked to hasn't expressed some sort of frustration about how NCEA just misses the mark in terms of letting kids know how they're getting along in their education. I visited my grandmother on the weekend, and she's 103, 102. She was the first year to do School C. I was in the last year to do School C. And across all those 60 plus years, there was a fairly constant, measurable sort of benchmark about how you were going. It wasn't perfect, but everyone knew what it meant. And so ever since, we've had the system that has been tinkered with, it's been played with, and it's really, really frustrating to parents. And I guess one of the things is that for Erica Stanford to come out and make these quite bold sort of announcements, the result is that it is a bit of a quandary for Labour, because Labour's clients and the teachers' unions and within the bureaucracy, they're against it, but there are more voters who are parents than there are teachers or teachers' unions. And so it's a bit of a classic wedge. What it does leave Chris Hipkins with is arguing about process, to say that actually we need to have a bipartisan process. And he did make that criticism, but was completely undercut by virtue of the fact that his education spokesperson willingly dropped the ball by refusing to engage. And so it was an easy own goal for National in a month when they really needed one.
Yeah, that was a bit untidy. Look, I haven't seen the teacher unions being particularly aggressive on it. It seemed pretty measured, their response, from what I saw. I might have missed something. But I think Erica Stanford played the politics very well. She's been widely praised for it in the media. I think when employers and parents have lost confidence in the system, it probably does need a change. I think the question is, what is the change? I'm not an education expert, so I'm not one to weigh in on that. But I think, at the risk of talking about process, I do think one of the challenges is you do need to be bipartisan. You don't want people playing political games and snookering each other too much, because these things have to be enduring, so that Liam can tell his grandkids one day about him doing School C or whatever. And so I think the short consultation is a challenge, and I think they're going to have to make sure there is wide buy-in, because we've had enough flips and flops between governments and other things. Education's one you really don't want to be mucking around with.
Is that fair, Liam? That
what you need
it's a very short time frame. I mean, essentially, this system is changing and will be brought in actually within a matter of months, even though it looks like it's not going to happen till 2029 or whenever it is, 2028.
It's totally fair. It needs to be stable. A bipartisan buy-in was incredibly important, which is why it's pretty disgraceful that the Ministry of Education was completely ghosted. Even when she went to Chris Hipkins and asked Chris Hipkins to intervene, the only thing I'd say nothing was happening. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And it's pretty passive aggressive, again, to be honest, to complain about being left out when you turn down the invitation.
So my concern is I'm not...
Liam, we're just having a little bit of trouble with your line. The line's just sounding very muffled. I'm not sure if you're able to kind of move around or get yourself into a different...
Is that better?
Oh, it's a million times better, yes.
Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I was crossing my arms. Look, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And you can't complain about not being invited into discussions when you turn down the invitation.
I think you're misunderstanding my point here, Liam. I'm not defending Willow Jean Prime not answering her emails. I think that was,
Why do you think that happened, though, Neale?
I don't know.
It feels like
her explanation.
She did answer her emails. She said, "I don't want to be involved."
Her explanation was that she wanted to go and consult before she got in touch. I don't think that was a. I'm not going to defend it. I think it was a mistake. And I think she's obviously learned a lesson from it. But my point was not that Willow Jean Prime needs more opportunity to consult. My point was the people of New Zealand and the various stakeholders in our education system, including parents, including employers, including the unions, across the board, need to actually have time to work through this and come up with something that is enduring and has broad support. So I don't want to confuse my critique of the short consultation and the risks around that with the latest spokesperson not answering their emails.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the fact that it has to be enduring. But the problem is that the government can't wait around, right, for the Labour Party to finally decide that it's ready to discuss it.
Again, though, Liam, it's not just about Labour and National. It's the education system of the whole New Zealand, which will outlast any particular term of government.
And we've had review after review of NCA. We've tinkered with it time after time again. And the thing is, I'm really glad that you included parents as a key stakeholder in this, because while the education experts have very, very important roles to play in this, parents have made it clear for a long time that they're really dissatisfied with the status quo.